Joining me now on the Knicks Film School Podcast, someone I'm honored to have on, someone I have long been a fan of, and someone who has made some waves recently with a much needed podcast entrant into the podcast field. It's a crowded field, but when a good one comes along, I mean, it's worth celebrating. I think that's the best way to say it. So happy to welcome to the program of the Spinsters pod on the Blue Wire Podcast Network, Haley O'Shaughnessy. How you doing?
That you were just too kind. First of all, thank you so much.
I'm not kind enough.
No, yeah, that was definitely very, very nice. I'm doing wonderful. Yeah, I'm doing wonderful. I was just telling you guys before the show began that I have a new puppy. So that's bringing me a ton of happiness. She's very sweet. So I'm doing great.
How new? We didn't get to that part.
Well, I was visiting my mom for a long time and we had her there, but I just came back to LA. And so she's new to LA. Okay. So kind of been an adjustment. It's like she's new all over again.
I mean, we were talking about my new daughter. We took her out of the house for the first time the other day. She's making all kinds of faces. I mean, it's new and exciting for all parties here.
Gonna say your newborn daughter is a little bit more of a commitment than I shouldn't be mentioning the dog, but yes, absolutely.
I mean, they eat, they emit, things. Not that big of a difference. It's just, and you have to look after them. It is what it is. But we're not here to talk about dogs or babies. We're here to talk about the NBA. Actually, first, we're if it's all right, I want to talk a little bit about you because I meant what I said before. I am a huge fan of yours and have been for some time. And it's because, what's the best way to put this? There's so many takes out there on the NBA. And when you find someone that gives a unique perspective that they are not afraid to give, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that you're just kind of nicer about your coverage. And it's the way you have presented your podcast. It's like, it's just things that you say. It's things that make you happy about the NBA. So let's start here. Where did that come from? Or how long have you kind of been that way? Like that's how you wanted to cover the sport?
Well, I definitely have also been critical of the league as a whole, but I've always felt that people are unusually harsh on players when maybe like the owners should get more criticism. And also basketball has been a constant through my life of something that I have enjoyed, and getting to cover it has been such a wonderful thing. I'm reminded by my friends daily who are, in offices that they are so envious of what I get to do every day. And especially with the things that Blue Wire supported, making Spinsters and really just kind of getting to do this weird thing of exploring the parts of it that I maybe are a little bit niche, but I've always been curious about. And I think there's so much more to cover than just what happens on the court, although that as well is, obviously the main component of why I love it so much. So I guess it comes from there. I just appreciate getting to do this every day. But, I think there's so much more to basketball than maybe is usually talked about and sports as a whole, but that's something excites me so much to explore.
So it's funny you say that because I was going to comment on how, am I allowed to bring up where you used to work?
Oh, of course. No, I've been saying this since I left the Ringer. It changed and developed me so much. I'm so grateful for everyone who helped me along the way to come up with, to encourage me to have these nuanced discussions about sports and explore the weird and the unusual, and the fact that basketball, I think, informs society and vice versa. So I have nothing but love for the Ringer, and I still support their stuff and read it every day, and the people there are so wonderful. So absolutely, I'm nothing but grateful.
Okay, cool. I'm making sure. When I first I was talking about this with Andrew before, when I first wrote my very first blog, I think if you asked me at that time, however many years ago, what's your goal ultimately? I think it probably would have been, then it probably would have been right for Grantland, and then eventually the Ringer came. And now that I'm doing this and I'm more cognizant of like content creation, I look around and it feels that the talking points are often so consolidated and that everybody's kind of going with the same story. And what I was going to say, that the Ringer is something like the Ringer or like ESPN, even, it's like a gift and a curse, right? Because they set the tone. And so when you just brought up a minute ago, like kind of niche things, your specific take, I feel like that's so needed sometimes, because for as much as there's like 1,000 podcasts out there, I don't get the sense that too many people are doing those niche takes in a way that's actually good and entertaining. So did you feel like like there is a need for what you guys are, you and Jordan are doing with this podcast?
Well, first of all, those podcasts and that coverage is so necessary, but it is what I think it's saturated, but the people who do it the best. I want to shout out people like Nikias, Duncan, and the Dishes and Dimes podcast, and then just larger sports like Burn It All Down. Oh no, not Burn It. Okay. Sorry, I got it because they're also different. Okay, 3, 2, 1. I want to shout out, people like Nikias, Duncan, and Dishes and Dimes podcast. They give great analysis, and I learned so much from them. And, I need that in my life. We need that in basketball coverage. But what I am hoping is that this provides something different, maybe less analytical, but also just talking about the things that interest me. So I'm hoping it's necessary. That's the bet that we are taking with it. But yeah, the weird, the different, the old stories, the new stories, history is one of my favorite things. So hopefully it is needed. I hope that your prediction, what you're saying, is correct.
No, I mean, listen, I'm addicted already. Like I was just listening before you guys were having and again, referencing, I have this conversation with Andrew earlier. Like, is Blake Griffin a Hall of Famer? Like that's, interesting little talking point. And ultimately you just want to be a part of these conversations with people you like. And, you guys are both likable, so that you're extraordinarily likable. So that's helpful. Man,
how much did Blue Wire pay you before this to be so kind?
I mean, I haven't checked my mailbox yet. Maybe there's a check waiting there. So something else you do when you made a point on the first show to say this is you're not just going to cover the NBA. You're going to cover the WNBA as well, and obviously all basketball, men's, women's. So you guys are you gals, you people. You are two women doing a podcast.
Guys is fine. Guys is great.
Guys, force of habit. And that's a perfect entryway because this is mostly a space where men dominate, and it's so needed. And I'm almost like, I was listening to your first episode. I'm like, why did it take two female podcast hosts to come along and be committed to talking about the WNBA? More people should be doing this. Is there a part that's like, it bothers you that this is not, getting covered, equally with the NBA, and that it kind of took you two to come along and be like, no, it's a basketball podcast. We're going to talk about basketball, including, everybody who plays it.
Maybe not bothers as much as just we see a gap. And anytime you see a gap, that's like, people who are super successful in this industry. Zach Lowe's one of them, who's again another podcast that I seek out regularly. That's, gives the analytics the more traditional, maybe breakdowns that, I appreciate so much. Maybe it's just like we see a gap, and that's what people who are successful tend to give as advice, pursue the gaps. But it's more that I think it is helpful and enjoyable, but helpful in the way that there's so many comparisons we make in the NBA. Who does this player remind us of? And what is this situation like? What is this trade? And what could be the impact? And we look at history and we say, oh, it could be this. But there are potentials for comparisons to the WNBA and just basketball in general and the reverse. And so it's not only something that we're interested in. Jordan is a huge fan, and I've enjoyed being by her side and learning more about the game and the players and the reputations and all the things that I love, learning about teams. But it's also something where we're broadening, I hope, the NBA experience in general, and the basketball experience, because there's so much to love about the W. So that's kind of where we decided not to focus on it as something where we just want to prop it up as, we're really trying to help women's sports. I genuinely think it's something that should be covered just because it is informative and, again, enjoyable. So it's less like we want to support and more like we're fucking interested. So
I mean, Zach talks about it all the time. His favorite player ever is arguably, Diana Taurasi, and who's, obviously female star. So if you love like the spicy players, everyone's like, oh, Jordan, and the shit talking, and everyone loves that so much, and the confidence. I'm like, you would love her. You'd absolutely love her. And so there is so much to love. And I honestly feel bad for people who aren't open to it, because you would really enjoy it. Yeah, I'm after all this is over, I can't wait to take my older daughter, who's she'll be 5 by the time it's like kind of safe to go back into WNBA games, and like see this stuff, because I just I want her so badly to be into this, and
something I talk about a lot is that there's a huge, I think now people acknowledge that people are too hard on women trying to be sports fans, because there's obviously always the quizzing and how much do you really know? And I've always said that there's really no criteria to be a sports fan, but we're not often given the same chance that little boys are, where our parents, talk to us about the game and encourage us to watch with them or even play. And so that's, it is a disadvantage, but when you become interested in something, you're interested in it. And the earlier on that happens, I think the better chance that we give women, but also it's always nice. And this crosses over to far more than sports, to feel like you could see yourself doing it.
Yeah.
So the more that the little girls and little boys, again, because maybe you identify with just a personality more, or, the way that they play on the court. It's, I kind of hope that opportunity opens up for kids, like boys or girls.
Yeah, it would be great if 2 female podcast hosts came along and had a podcast about basketball, and like it's 2 female podcast hosts talking about basketball wasn't one of the talking points. It's just like, hey, there's just new awesome basketball podcast, but we still live in a world where it's part of the discourse, right? So that's why I appreciate Jordan so much, because she often draws these comparisons, and she often pushes the boundaries of the NBA. The WNBA can inform the NBA. And we actually have in the future, like a feature, we have a contributor working on a piece for us where we are talking about, I don't want to spoil it, but just something that, too much. Yeah.
Something that the NBA can learn from the WNBA. And I kind of hope as a league that also continues to be something they're open to.
Well, I think they could learn a lot, because I, like you, it's okay to be critical of the league, because they don't always
look.
get it
if
right.
you love something, it's a sign, if you're critical of it, that it's how much you love it.
Yeah, because if you didn't care, you didn't care. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Knicks, because you have talked about the Knicks on this podcast. You've talked about the Knicks in the past. Is there any place to start other than Tom Thibodeau?
It's such a joy for me. I've tweeted a lot lately this season with the Premier League that Bielsa reminds me of him a lot, and that which doesn't make sense to a lot of people. And I agree, because it's not a direct one-to-one comparison, but his obsession with the game is something I've always enjoyed with coaches. And, when Tibbs is good, the NBA is better and the narratives are more fun.
Well, it's funny you say that, because that's often what's said about the Knicks, right? Is like, when the Knicks are good, the NBA is better. And now here's Tibbs, and Tibbs is back. It's funny. There's this, you talk about being obsessed. There's now a little bit of a running joke between the beat writers in New York and Tibbs about that he was going to be in Turks and Caicos for this All-Star break, and he was going to go, just sit on the beach, because of course Tibbs would sit on the beach and relax during the middle of the season.
Nah, he's drawing X's and O's in the sand.
Yeah, is he just, I'm trying to think of like, is there another, because I feel like we don't have as many coaches anymore with these kind of outsized personalities that are almost like caricatures of themselves, especially here in New York. Like if I could be blunt, like Jeff Hornacek was fucking boring. Putting aside that he was maybe not, the best coach, he was just like, he was there. We had a couple other guys. Mike D'Antoni's nice, but like Tibbs is, I feel so honored every time I get to listen to the man talk. Like, isn't he he's a gift.
Oh no, it's definitely so fun. And I think that there's a trend that I definitely do support, which there are more like quote unquote player coaches now. And, they try to, I think, empathize a little bit and not take on the weird, like dad figure, which is such a problem in sports, especially college sports. But I don't think Thibodeau's the opposite of that. I don't think he's completely the old school coach who screams and dictates. Like he definitely does yell, but I think it's kind of out of just passion for the game and not like disdain for his players or thinking that he's better. So yes, I love his outsized personality, and I agree that some coaches are kind of boring. So
yeah. But he's doing this. Actually, Julius Randle used the word soft in talking about Tibbs. And
I love the term soft. I've never thought that it's an insult. I think it's a wonderful thing to be soft. Yeah.
I like the fact that Tibbs is kind of softening up because and you guys have talked about this, on your pod, like the shelf life, you just come to expect that it's going to be short. And if he doesn't kind of start to, I don't like seeing how this season has gone for the Knicks from afar. Do you feel like, obviously Julius Randle, I don't know if he's first in the league in minutes or close to first. Do you think that this could actually last with Tibbs here in charge?
Well, so that's, knowing that we were going to talk about him, obviously, because of the subject of your podcast. I was going to ask you how you felt about him coming to New York, because having followed the Wolves very intimately before him and then, during his time, which helped see what he improved and kind of damaged with their team. I wrote down all of the concerns that I had before he was hired, and I don't think that they all cross over, which is a good sign for his longevity. The minutes, however, was top of the list. And because that directly translates to injuries, which directly translates to not being the best team that you can be. Yeah. So that is a concern for sure. The other ones that I wrote down was, they drafted Chris Dunn. Every time that Chris made a mistake, he wasn't allowed to play through it. Thibodeau took him out. So I think that really hurt Chris Dunn. I really think that Chris Dunn would be a better player today had he not been taken out during those moments. But I don't think that applies today. Look at Quickly. And I hope you disagree with me on some of these things or correct me if you feel like I'm wrong. But I don't think that he has shown that. And maybe that's just that he believes more in these players, which is, again, a wonderful sign for Knicks drafting.
Or he's more desperate because there's not as much talent on this team. Like the thing with Quickly so far this season, and I do like live streams after every game, if it's a game where Quickly it doesn't, if he plays 12, 13, 14 minutes, it doesn't matter how he played. People are usually like, why did Quickly only play 12, 13 minutes? And I feel like Tibbs this season, at least, if Quickly's rolling, he'll leave him out there. And those are the games we've seen where he plays like 25, 30 minutes. If he's struggling, he takes him out, which for me, that's fine. I don't, it's like you're trying to win games. Ideally.
You have a real chance at the playoffs. And I'll go ahead and say that. But which is why I understand that. And that was not true with the Wolves that season. They were completely like, okay,
the first
season we need to absolutely just focus on developing our players. Winning, going to the playoffs is not even in the picture. So I do understand that more. And I'm glad that what you said about him being able to stay in when he is playing well. I do think that that's a wonderful sign. There are definitely coaches who, like, even when players are obviously deserving of more minutes, they don't give them to them, which is odd for me. I think about Michael Porter Jr. last year before, pre-pandemic.
That was perplexing from afar.
Weird, yeah.
I don't watch a whole lot of Denver, but like seeing that dude just, and I feel like it's enough of a talking point that like you hear it outside of just the Denver media, right?
Yeah, and there are some obviously like another thing that I feel strongly about is that coaches, yes, they're perplexing to us, but maybe they have their reasons and they're far more qualified than me, obviously, to be making those choices. But there are certain things where I'm just like, this is kind of egregious. Like we've seen what he's doing. He could absolutely help in this game, in this situation. So that was one that was very confusing to me.
Can I ask, do you struggle with that? Because I do. Because again, when I talk to Knicks fans, they're like, why are you being so deferential? Like he's a coach. He could make mistakes. I'm like, but he's a head coach in the NBA. He must be eminently more qualified to make these decisions than me. He must, but I go back and forth on this. Like, our right to critique almost as fans, as content creators. It's like, I don't know where to draw the line, Yeah.
And I think it just needs context. There are some front offices that have proven that the scouts that they rely on to make these drafting decisions ultimately turn out good enough in 3 or 4 years. And sometimes that's something that scouts identify, from the ones that I've talked to, is that this will be a long-term investment, but we see this certain potential and that's their job. So I think as NBA fans, we're definitely impatient, and that can hurt us when we're trying to, play head coach or GM, but there is a line. And with examples like MPJ, like that's definitely for me was the line.
Yeah, but the flip side of the coin here, at least, is like we had Kevin Knox, who was given carte blanche to just go out there and play. I don't know if you watched. Do you remember Kevin Knox's rookie?
Was kind of. Well, speaking of coaches who you question, I'm like but I think a theme with the Knicks that's fair enough. And you brought this up with Thibodeau is desperation. I think some of those lineups came from desperation. He's extremely smart. We've seen that with his assistant coaching roles. And again, maybe there's something to that, or he'd hoped that there was something to that. But I think a lot of Knicks coaches have felt that desperation. So I can't entirely blame him, but there were some bizarre decisions there for sure.
Yeah, it was. And it like comparing that and then like Frank Ntilikina also, there were moments where fans were like, why is he not playing more? I don't think that there's any hard and fast rule that you could make about like, okay, you have a rookie, your team is supposed to be this good, and therefore you must play this rookie this many minutes. It's like, that's when you get into problems. And I feel like the nice thing about Tibbs is he's a coach that, from my vantage point at least, I could sit here as someone who is a fan of this team. Like, I trust him. I trust that he knows what is for the best. Does it mean he actually does? Certainly not. But he's earned my trust. I'll say that.
Well, I think that's fair. And that brings me back to my list of concerns.
Yeah, keep going. I'm curious.
Originally got hired is that defense was one of them, and alienating young guys was another one. And he's proven that he is not always the guy who coached the Wolves, and he can be, who he was the majority of his time with the Bulls. And with the Wolves, the strong side defense seemed outdated, or at least inappropriate, because they didn't have the guys to run it. And it's a 3-point shooting league now. It made it less effective. So I was definitely worried about defense, especially, I think a lot of coaches like rest on the fact that they changed something once, that the schemes were revolutionary once. And so Perry Stotts comes to mind, like the defense, the drop back defense is obviously hurt them for years.
I was about to say, how's Portland been doing defensively for?
Yeah, exactly. Years? But I mean, hello, backcourt defense, and you're a really good defensive rebounding team. So I think that he should be given that credit. And, again, with like making lineup decisions and minutes decisions, that's another thing where you say, okay, we should just kind of trust him because this has worked out for us so far. And also with alienating young guys, completely, I haven't seen a single sign of that this year. And if anything, they've been very inspired. What turned the Wolves for sure, and I can say this confidently, was the massive amount of minutes and the load that they were forced to carry. So some of that is front office. Give him guys who can back up the starters competently. But, a lot of it is like he failed to recognize that these players were burnt out, that it was being detrimental. And so that's a decision that I'm, curious to see if as the latter half of the season plays out. Is that something that's going to continue? Everyone's tired. I'm tired. You guys are tired, so I can't imagine with the players, what's going on with them, which I think is another thing that I wish NBA fans practiced a little more, is that there are people just like us, and we're super tired. So of course they are this year as well.
It's probably a good transition because the guy who is most likely to be tired and said, I think during his All-Star interview, after the game, somebody asked him if he minded if he only played 13 minutes. Julius Randle was like, hell no. I'm cool with it. We had the game I think was right before the break where they were like up 15 or 20 points on the Pistons and with like 3 minutes to go, and Julius Randle's out there on the court, and like that's one of those times where you're looking at on the sideline at Tibbs and be like, okay, is this really we're gonna finish the game out with this lineup? So
I will say because I definitely was close to a lot of people who were close to Wolves players at the time, that sometimes that's not completely just the coach's decision. Guys, for good reason, if they are having a good season, or even if it's in their contract as an incentive, they want to reach certain stat points, especially if the teams that they're playing are easy to put those stats up against.
Well, so Julius Randle just got $1 million for making the All-Star team. So
right. So I do kind of think maybe there might be some asks that we don't hear about, but at some point you're a coach, you probably should draw the line. And maybe we should go back and watch those games and say, like, was he at a double-double? Was he close to, even a triple-double? Is he trying to get his assists up? That's been like the biggest improvement for me, has been his eagerness to share the ball and to play make. And that's, been the thing I think he's most complimented on for his transformation. So, I could see that. I definitely I don't have stats. I don't know what my equivalent to that is, but it feels nice to be publicly applauded for something, especially if it's that measurable and everyone can see it every night. If you're seeing people say nice things about you, I think you probably want that continued. Well,
I'm happy you used the word transformation because I was looking at his basketball reference page, Julius Randle's, the other day. And I was looking at like the per 36 numbers. And I'm like, it's funny. They're really, other than the assists, which are up, really not that different. Even, the 3-point shooting, obviously. But it makes me happy that someone who covers the NBA generally and can realizes this is a transformation. This is a different player. And that's really, really cool because I think it means a lot to him, especially since he's come out recently and talked about how last year was such a disappointment for him personally. How he came here and I get maybe tried to take on too much or just didn't figure out a way to balance it. Fans have asked me, people are like, what's the comparison to this? And I don't have a great answer for it because I don't know that this happens very often in the NBA.
No, and with stats, I think people a lot of the times try to compare the jumps, and I don't love when people do that because there's always context involved. Is there another player who on the team who you are being a better teammate? You are doing what's right for the team to give them more opportunities. I just think there's a lot of context that's ignored. But I was thinking about this. I actually think, if we go recent history, we're not comparing positions necessarily or influence on team, or we are comparing just influence on team and not stats. Particularly another former Laker, Brandon Ingram, comes to mind, just in terms of massive jumps that kind of surprised people because maybe we'd pegged them as a certain type of player. Pascal Siakam's growth alongside Kawhi comes to mind, but that's a little bit different because Julius Randle has kind of done this on his own, which makes it more impressive. But I wish I didn't find it more surprising because I don't think it's fair. I don't think we let NBA players grow up. We don't give them that allowance. And what happens to us between 21 and 26? I mean, we become less selfish. We start to consider others more. We take on more responsibility. I mean, I'm 27 and I just am now only feeling ready to get a dog and take care of a dog, which I did. And again, very cute. But Randall is 26. So no wonder he's suddenly wanting to pass more and thinking of others and seeming capable of truly helping facilitate and run an offense. You grow up, and I wish we gave NBA players the chance to.
Yeah, and like, it's funny, we were talking about I have another kid now. Like, Julius has not been bashful about putting his son out there and like how he plays basketball, and even something like that, like, your priorities change when you go through life events, right? Like you just came over to Blue Wire, like, I had a kid, like all these things, and it makes me think back to what you said before. We forget these people are people a lot of the time, and like
with lives and stress and, all kinds of things outside. Yeah, absolutely.
When he had to come to a new city, a new place, expectations, the whole thing last season. And like, if you look at his career, it's funny you bring up Ingram and Siakam, like he was on a somewhat steady increase of production until last season. And that's when it fell off. So really, if you look at what's happening now, maybe if you just kind of take last season out of it and like give him an asterisk and like, okay, let's just skip over that. Maybe it's not that crazy. You're right about that.
Well, and the other thing is that you go to New York and it's a wonderful fan base. Like it really is. You guys are so passionate. No, but really,
say what you're going to say. No,
you're
just,
good. You're good to you put a lot of hope in your players. Like even the draft, you guys come around and you're like, okay, like Frank, for years, you guys have been saying Frank, Mitchell Robinson, like you're very supportive. So I can see wanting to do well by Knicks fans. And it's also a lot of pressure. Like, and there was all the making fun of like all the forwards who were signed. And so, they see that, they see the teasing, they see the articles and the NBA groupthink on Twitter. And I also think we're pretty dismissive of adjustment time. And also like, are we setting them up to be successful? I don't think last year he was. And then Thibodeau can obviously make a difference, which is a pleasant surprise again after his Wolves tenure. Yeah,
no, and he and just the whole mindset of the organization changed, which is nice too. But all the credit to I have to bring this up because you just reminded me of this. I get critical of New York Knicks fans, and it's especially the last covering games a little bit last year, like you see behind the curtain a little bit. Like I got into a lot of trouble with people when so they re-signed Elfrid Payton right this summer, $5 million, and people were just killed the move. And I came out on Twitter, I'm like, the guy wasn't bad last year. You just signed him 1 year, $5 million. Like maybe it's time, and given how people are reacting, maybe it's time we look ourselves in the mirror and like why maybe don't players always want to come and deal with this? And people just absolutely killed me for it. And they should have, because it was not the right time. And honestly, it was maybe not the right player to do that about. But
I don't know. I mean, I don't know that I really disagree with that. The timing lined up with Kevin Durant and Kyrie. I was like, God, I just had to think. I'm like, what year are we in? Is this like 2025? I have no idea.
That was so last season they signed him initially, and then fast forward to they re-signed him essentially. They let him go in free agency, and then they re-signed him in like the span of a couple of days. So yeah, we had a year experience of Elfrid Payton, and he wasn't terrible. He just can't shoot, So that's why I was like,
giving allowance to say there's a stage you have to go through, which is saying, okay, we have to accept that people don't want to come here right now. So let's say you have to kind of take bets on the guys who were fine and hope that they build a team into somewhere that people want to go. And that's just part of the process.
Continuity.
Sometimes teams have to go through this stage. Yeah. And I think the Jazz are a good example.
They're the best example in the league.
If they keep this up, I often make fun of that's kind of the last place anybody wants to go. But if you build a culture strong enough, not only will players come, but more important for somewhere like Utah, and this might not be as important for the Knicks in the future, players want to re-sign. So when you get someone who has taken a chance on you, you get to keep them. They're still interested. And that's one of the things that I think the Knicks have definitely struggled with. So I don't know that your criticisms of that were unfounded.
Well, I appreciate you. Whether you're lying or not, I appreciate you saying as much because I felt really. I still go back to that, and I'm like, was it the right thing to say or not? But it was honest, so
Man, criticisms are things you write and say are tough. Like, I definitely agree with that. But I do think that Randle felt a lot of pressure to please New York and New York fans, and I do honestly believe. I'll tell you from my Blue Wire experience, I felt nothing but super strong support the entire time. And it makes you want to, this project you're taking on, it makes you want to do super, super well and put a lot of pressure on yourself, obviously. So I can relate, although his is such a far more public journey. And there's so many more Knicks fans that are like looking at him and saying like, please do well. And, also I think with a fan base like this, you're desperate for someone to believe in. So that's a lot of pressure. I understand why it took him a bit to adjust.
Yeah, the expectations are high. It's funny, we collectively as fans will talk about how terrible we're going to be in a given year, and then they go out and they'll like lose a game in like some form or fashion, and the reaction to that will be such that you would think that they didn't, like, these are different people than the ones that were like, we're going to be bad. It's like there's still an expectation once you get into the game that like things will go well. And I think that's to a certain extent every fan base, but there's just more Knicks fans than, maybe the Lakers, if that. And they're, we're a loud, angry bunch usually. I'm not too angry. I shouldn't say that. I'm a fairly nice person. From your perspective, do you think it's okay for Knicks fans right now to feel good about this team and where it's headed?
Yeah, to me, why not? I hate unnecessary cynicism in all aspects of life. There's so much we can't help but be cynical about today and need to be cynical about. I mean, I'm sorry to get a little bit political on your podcast, but we're just now getting the second stimulus. But, sports are such a wonderful happiness in my life and in many people's life. I enjoy the Knicks. What's it matter if the playoffs are a maybe? You have a maybe for the first time in so long. You have a roster that suggests real cohesion. Tibbs has flipped defensive erasure basically into a culture that cares enough to get back on fast breaks. So, and those are all eye test things. And I recognize that because of the way NBA fandom has trended, people want more assurance today, but there are good signs there too. The Knicks are second overall in defensive rating.
We're still second, yeah. Yeah,
even if there's dips the second half of the season, like again, there are total reasonable, excusable reasons for dips for any team this season because of the way life is. But yeah, you definitely, I think, have a future, and it's okay to believe that. And you also legitimately have a present too. So I hope that Knicks fans are relishing in that. The ultimate thing as a sports fan is to accept that a good thing can disappear in off season from now, but that doesn't mean you can't love and enjoy what's happening right now.
For me, it's hard to accept that the good thing is happening because it's just, that's what's been conditioned in me.
Well, if you get burned, I can also see if you get burned before and you're like, okay, I've had hope before. It's kind of hard to let that into your life. But yeah. I would encourage you to, if you can.
I'm trying. Like we're recording this on Thursday. They're going to play the Bucks in 3 hours. And like my wife asked me before, she's like, "You excited about the game tonight?" And I gave her like yeah, I'm excited. We're in Milwaukee, we'll see what happens. And it's just because it's just been a lot of years
but moral wins are real to me, and they're like legitimate. And so, sure. Moral. No, it's moral wins is the expression. Yeah. I was like, man, I'm awake before this podcast for once, and I'm like, maybe I'm not, maybe I'm tired. But yeah, I think that even those are a good sign. And again, the playoffs are a maybe, but that's fine. The Bucks are really good, and they do have flaws. So even for part of the time, taking advantage of those flaws, I think, is a win for me. But again, I'm not a Knicks fan. So if you're listening to this right now and you're rolling your eyes, I understand.
I do not think anybody should be rolling their eyes. So before I let you go, because you do pay a lot of attention to the league as a whole. I'm just curious personally, what are you most excited about for the rest of the season? Give me like whatever, 2-3 things that you're just really looking forward to seeing how like either storylines develop, seeing what happens with certain teams, certain players, awards, like anything that you're into.
Yeah. The Suns, for sure. The in-between teams, I'm not just like pandering to you right now, but definitely the Knicks and the Hornets. I love watching the Hornets. The Jazz, is it sustainable? Can they have a major glow up in the playoffs like the Nuggets did last season? That was exhilarating. And I guess that comparison actually doesn't work because the Jazz are a super strong regular season team, but they haven't been known to really hold on to that yet. But
it's funny you say that because I actually would be more surprised if the Jazz broke into the conference finals this year than I think I was about Denver last year, just because I think that highly of Jokic. Not that I don't think highly of Donovan Mitchell, but like Jokic is just such a special.
Well, the surprise to me was Jamal Murray. And he was really their story. So
flame shooting out of his butt for however.
Yeah. Oh God, it was so fun. I absolutely loved it. But yeah. I love when random teams do well. Like the Miami Heat obviously have a history with success, but them breaking through was so fun to me. The NBA was like, fuck. They were like, God, I wish it was the Celtics because of that, historic rivalry. I'm like, you guys need to just figure out your marketing because that was the most fun team ever. It was bought versus grown team. I loved that. And I would love the Jazz. I would love the Knicks and Hornets to have a play-in game. And I would love the Suns to make it far. I love that. So that's just me personally, but yeah, that's what I'm excited about. Before we go I have a game for you.
A game for me?
Yeah.
I like games. Okay.
I knew we were going to talk about Thibodeau. I suspected that. So I actually have collected some quotes of his since he's such a fun quote and also ridiculous. And there's 3 of them.
Okay.
And I want you to tell me which ones he said and which ones I made up.
Oh, goodness gracious. Oh, this is going to be good. I'm going to look bad at my own podcast, but this is good.
No. Many of these are before the Knicks. Well, many. There's only 3. Okay. So this first one's from his time with the Wolves. And this was when Zach LaVine was injured. So they asked Tibbs, how do you make sure LaVine still feels a part of things when he's out with his injury? And Tibbs said, yell at him daily. Okay.
So
let me go through and then you can, yeah. So that's the first one.
Okay.
The second one, this was his response to Jimmy Butler asking for a trade also during the Wolves tenure. Quote, I know he loves living here. He's so ridiculous. And the third one, this is after the Knicks saying him happy birthday. And he had that win on his birthday, I think, over the Celtics. Quote, I'm never happy unless I'm miserable.
So I have to pick the one that's fake or the one that's real?
Just any that you think are fake.
Well, the happy miserable one I know is real.
I should have known that was too easy. I had to throw you a softball.
It's made its way onto a t-shirt. That's the only.
Shut up.
Yeah.
Send me the link. I need the link to that. I love that.
I don't have the link. I've seen him. There's a picture floating around of Emmanuel Quickly wearing the t-shirt. Actually,
oh God. If anyone can find that for me, please send it. That's wonderful.
I may actually have it because if I recall, now that I'm thinking about it, somebody may have reached out to me with some kind of like whatever. Okay. So that's real. I think the LaVine thing is real. I'm pretty sure that's real. I do not think he said that about Jimmy Butler. He likes living here.
They're all real.
He actually said that Jimmy Butler enjoyed living in Minnesota.
He loved that Jimmy was so like fired up. He was like, this is great. Like he loved that. So yes, I tricked you on your own podcast, but they're all real.
Well, first of all, I'm easily duped. So don't feel too good about yourself. I'm just throwing that right out there. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm trying to think what the latest one is. Oh yeah, anytime anybody asks him about anything remotely involving like free agency or trades or anything, he just keeps saying that's a question for Leon Rose. And Leon Rose has given all of one interview since he's been hired, and it was to Mike Breen on MSG, where no reporters could ask him questions. So I think maybe maybe I'll make that into a t-shirt. That's the question for Leon. That might sell. We'll see.
Yeah. Yep. That definitely would. Any of the ones where he's like, no, I'm never satisfied, I'm never happy. Those are my favorite ones because it'll be like a wonderful moment. And he's like, I don't care. I'm not happy unless I'm miserable. So
God, I want to see him win a championship as a head coach. Obviously, he won one as the Celtics assistant coach, but
I do have that picture of him smiling, like really big, saved on my phone. So
do you?
I also enjoy it. Yeah,
like the silly grin. Yeah, that's a good one. This has been great. I could talk to you about the NBA for hours, but you have other things that you have to do. Would you just be so kind as to remind folks one more time, in case they are living under a rock, where they could find you and your wonderful podcast and other stuff?
You can find Spinsters and subscribe, please, on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcast. You can follow me on Twitter for more extremely milquetoast takes at Haley O something. I almost said my real last name. How tired am I? At Haley O something, which is a username I made because people can't find my last name. It's impossible to spell.
I don't think it's that hard. I mean, I don't know. Maybe because people misspell my last name, which is 5 letters. I mean,
I can see that.
Yeah, but it is nonetheless annoying. And I'll give you one more. How about, in addition to subscribing to Haley's podcast, you give and what's the other thing? Give it a rating. Give it a positive review, right? Because that's what you're supposed to. 5-star, and as Andrew holds up the 5 fingers.
I'm gonna say, look, if you just think it's pretty mild, I will take that feedback. Give it a no. Andrew's shaking his head. He's like, don't say that. But I just want to know, if you don't like it, if you don't like it, email me and tell me how you would like it better. And as long as you're not emailing me like a dick pic or something, that's, I would love the email.
No dick pics. There's someone who, we have a YouTube channel too, that within like a half an hour of, regardless of what we put up, there's always 2 thumbs downs. It's like clockwork. And I want to find out who the people are just so I could like.
It's like a guy who hated you in middle school. That's who it is. It's like you probably like dated his girlfriend and he was like, God, I'm going to get back at him for the rest of his life. Don't worry about it.
Oh man, you just got me thinking of if there's like any exes that have that reason to dislike me. I thought there's a lot of reasons I could imagine people disliking me. That is not one.
Oh, whatever. I'm sure that's not true, but that should make you feel better because I'm sure that it's just somebody with an insane lifelong. Vendetta,
I want to congratulate them because that takes dedication to every time somebody posts something to just go on there and like clockwork. I'm going to give it my thumbs down.
If you're out there, Brandon, and I know your name is Brandon, stop, give it up. Like he dated Debbie when you guys were in 7th grade. Let it go.
The fact that you just use Debbie is that's an inside joke that I'm going to share with some friends as soon as I get done with this. I'm going to send the text. Okay, now we've gone out from there, as I do inevitably on my own podcast. Thank you, Haley, so much. Please, everybody, go check out Spinsters Pod. It's really good. I'm not just saying that because you're on here. I'm an avid listener already. It's just nice to hear some more people talk about basketball who you want to spend time with. And that is what it is.